Greetings and welcome. We are in Senior AP English, and our objective now for the hour is to introduce you to the poetry of the maybe greatest of the Romantic poets, John Keats. Let's talk about Keats for a few moments. The place I actually want to start is in your hymnal, though, and I want you looking just real quickly at 860. So go ahead and look at that, and I want you to run the numbers for his dates real quickly. Run the mathematics to see how old he is when he dies.
26.
Okay? That's important. Okay? That's important. Now, let's tell the story of Keats's biography. Much of this poet is really defined by that biography. So let's talk about it. Keats is the last of the Romantic poets that we'll speak of. He is a second-generation poet. And his life is in many ways the most tragic. London is a town that sits kind of in a declivity, like a bowl. If you visit it, you'll get a sense of this. The air kind of hovers over London. And the majority of the homes are heated, and they do all their cooking with coal, black coal. So you've got all of the people in London firing their stoves with black coal, and the air just kind of hovers over the city. There are historians that say there are times of the year when the city of London, the lights must be lit so that people can see at middle of day. The smoke just hangs over the city. And everybody breathes this stuff. So one of the common illnesses that led to death was pleurisy of the lungs. Consumption, it was often referred to. The lungs become infected. And you start coughing the way you normally would cough when you have a cold. But the only difference is when you hold your hanky or your hand up to your mouth, blood will hit the hanky. When that happens, you know your lungs are bleeding. And when that happens in 1800, it's just a matter of time for you. The only real cure is to try to extricate yourself from that environment, and the place of choice is Italy, which of course has, even today, some of the best weather on the planet, especially as you get further south, close to the Mediterranean. Okay? Keats will lose a number of people in his family to this terrible illness. And he watches these people die. He himself has bad health. And from a very young age, for example, will tell stories about being a schoolboy and not being allowed to go outside and play soccer in PE class with the other kids, but stuck inside of the library where he has to look out the window. The only thing he can do is read books, which is what he does. From a very early age, Keats decides he wants to be a poet. Sharing Shelley's view, as expressed in Defense of Poetry, Keats believes the greatest people alive, the greatest people who have ever lived, were poets. I don't say that he believes this in terms of giving lip service. I mean, he genuinely believes it. He is a man of tremendous ambition. He, like Milton, he wants to be able to write the greatest poems of all time. Milton is in many ways his guide here. Keats will read Milton's poetry upon, his poem about losing his sight and stuff like that. And Keats pities Milton for having lost his sight so early. Then, one afternoon, Keats starts coughing up blood. All right? In that moment, he begins to realize, for him, it's also over. Now, Keats himself will not die in England. He actually dies in Rome. There's a very famous place right there at the Spanish Steps. You can see the room where Keats died. It's now turned into a museum for Keats, a tribute to Keats. He doesn't die in England, but he knew long before he dies in that afternoon in Rome. He knew he was already dead. He was a dead man walking, and he was extremely young. Some of his most important work, then, he writes when he knows it's already over. He goes for a visit to the Museum of Natural History in London, where finds have just been brought back from Greece. Okay, the way these guys did this is, even today, if you're in Athens at all, they still get really fired up about this. English treasure hunters on the Acropolis will take the sculptures right off the Parthenon. Under cover of night, they put it in boats and they take it back to England, where they will display these finds, these amazing finds that collectively are called the Elgin marbles. Okay, and they're amazing sculptures. Greece immediately wants them returned. England will say, yeah, we'll give them back to you here in a few weeks. We want to let everyone else see them. Well, guess what? They're still sitting, all right, in museums in London. Okay, they've never been returned. And Greece, the country, is still pretty fired up about the fact that England came in and robbed Greece of some of its most important finds. These Elgin marbles are really important in the life of Keats. He will go and he will sit and look at these amazing works of art. One of them is an urn that will sit on a little turntable thingy where you can stand in one place and you can see all sides of the urn. Okay? Keats will write several poems during this time that tell us what he's dealing with as he knows he soon must die. My spirit is too weak. Mortality weighs upon me like unwilling sleep, and each imagined pinnacle and steep of godlike hardship tells me, one of the most compelling word pictures of all time, that I must die like a sick eagle looking at the sky. His word picture is, he's a sick eagle sitting in the cleft of a high rock, watching all of the other eagles fly, and he knows two things. One, he ain't flying anymore, and two, he soon will be dead. The kid is barely 20. He will write, when I have fears that I may cease to be, and all of a sudden it makes total sense. Normally, people your age don't write poems about knowing they're going to die. It's not that we don't know that we're going to die. It's that for us, we're young. Keats knows he's going to die. And what is it that he's so concerned about? Before my pen has gleaned my teeming brain. He knows before he dies, he's not going to get everything written that he wants to write. Before high-piled books and charactery, whole like rich garners the full ripened grain, he recognized, and he said this, that when he would walk into libraries after he knew he was dying, that he felt like all of the volumes were laughing at him, saying, you will never read me. And this for Keats, I mean, for those of us who are not academics, and certainly don't take our reading this seriously, Keats is maybe a little, drama-esque. Of course, right now, we have to say this, don't we? Right now, sitting on this planet, there are people your age not in a classroom. They're in a doctor's office where a doctor is telling them, yeah, I don't know if you're going to be around by September. There are people your age being told that right now. If that was you right now, how would the experience of being 30-plus school days away from graduation be different for you? See, Keats will say, oh no, trust me. He says, it changes everything radically when you start coughing up this blood on his hanky. You recognize what it is you want to accomplish that you're not going to accomplish. When I behold upon the night starred face huge cloudy symbols of a high romance, and think that I may never live to trace their shadows with the magic hand of chance. We're not talking romance here as in falling in love. We'll get to that in this sonnet. He's talking about the romance of life. Remember, he's a romantic poet. For Keats, a lot of it is travel. He will recognize he's going to die and never see any of the world. He ultimately will see the world a bit, only by visiting Italy. But by that point, he's too sick. And he's so totally focused on trying to write something before he dies. He has this maniacal drive to try to create some kinds of poetic lines before he leaves. And when I feel, to finish the sonnet, notice it is a when, then sonnet construction. Do you see it? Playing the same game that his great mentor Shakespeare and Milton will have taught him. And when I feel, fair creature of an hour, Let's go ahead now and inject this into our biography because it just gets more depressing. The study of Keats can be a very depressing study. Not only is he coughing up blood, he falls in love. And I mean falls in love, as in this is the girl of his dreams, falls in love. And she loves him back. They want to get married, but daddy of the girl's side says, well, what does he do for a living? Oh, he's a poet. Not going to happen. We're not having marriage to a poet. Dad doesn't allow it, and she obeys her father. Kind of like the Ophelia thing, huh? And Keats will die without his girl, which will almost haunt him worse than not having his poetic lines long enough to be able to write his poetic lines. Notice the last of the when clauses in this sonnet. And when I feel, fair creature of an hour, that I shall never look upon thee more, never have relish in the fairy power of unreflecting love. When I feel like I'm going to die before I don't get everything written, don't get everything read, don't get everything seen. And then there's that thing about my girl. He says, when I begin to think about the fact that soon I got to go, cease to live, and I don't get all those things done, what is it that he does? Take a look. It's fascinating. He says, then on the shore of the wide world I stand alone and think, till love and fame to nothingness do sink. Now this is an interesting word picture. He says, I go out to the edge of the universe, metaphorically speaking, and I look back on the history of time, and two things cease to matter to me. I no longer care about them anymore. What are those two things? Love and fame. Now I'm really going to find out if anybody's actually read and done your homework. Before he dies in Rome, Keats writes the words he wants on his tombstone, which, by the way, you can visit when you visit Rome. He's buried there. He's not buried in England. Does anyone know what he wrote for his words on his tombstone? It's in your book. It's in the biography in your book. What is it?
Here lies one whose name was written in water.
Here lies one. This is Keats. This is Keats. He wanted this on his tombstone. Before the young kid dies, he has these words put on his tombstone. Here lies one whose name was writ in water. You cannot read the poetry of Keats and appreciate it without understanding this being the quote on his tombstone that he wanted. Here lies one whose name was writ in water. I don't understand. So right now, if we go to the swimming pool and you take a stick and you make a mark in this water of the swimming pool, what happens to the mark? Immediately gone. What does it mean to say, here lies one whose name was writ in water?
He thought he was going to get freaked out forever because...
Yep, he was thoroughly convinced that he had not lived long enough to produce anything that would allow for him to be remembered, and fame was the thing that mattered most to him. Again, Milton was his model here. That's a pretty lofty model. I mean, if you're going to pick a model, really? Milton, the great Milton? I mean, those of you who worked through those lines and cursed Milton's name with a little bit of distance after the fact have to admit, as much as you hated that poetry, you have to kind of stand in awe of that poetry. I mean, that is kind of a poetic cathedral that you kind of look at and go, yeah, I don't know how anybody created this. That's kind of how Keats saw it, but he wanted to rival it, and then all of a sudden he starts coughing up blood. And he writes, here lies one whose name was written in water, and then he dies at an extremely young age. You did the mathematics, right? For some of you, you're only just a year or a few years away from that date yourself. Very young, right? He dies. Now the final irony before we get to his greatest poem. Today, if you go anywhere on this planet and you walk into any literature department and you say, name the 5 greatest poets in the English language, just name them. Number 1 is non-negotiable. Nobody really debates number 1. Everyone knows it's Shakespeare, okay? Number 2 is usually a debate in regards to probably Milton is going to be there. But guess who always ends up in the top 5? No debate. It's not Wordsworth. It's not Byron. It's not Shelley. It's Keats. Now, his collected works can be held in a very slender volume. He didn't write that much. And yet, no poet of the English language of the English Romantic period is going to be given greater respect by the 20th century than John Keats. He is way ahead of his time. As a young kid, what he produces in the final moments of his life, especially in regards to his sonnets, are considered some of the greatest of all time. Let me give you a classic example of Keats. A new translation had just been made of Homer's Iliad. The guy who did the translation was named Chapman. He was a poet. He was fluent in Greek, so he makes this translation. A friend of Keats gives this brand new translation to Keats. He gives it to him. Hey, Chapman's just translated this new copy of the Iliad. Why don't you take a look at it? The friend goes over to Keats's apartment the next morning to see, did you read like the first book to see kind of what you thought, about it? And he knocks on the door, and the door is open, but Keats is asleep. And so he walks in, and sitting on the nightstand is an envelope. Written on that envelope are some words. His pal picks them up, and those words are a sonnet that Keats wrote. Are you ready for this? He didn't sleep that night. He stayed up all night, and he read the entire Iliad in one sitting. And then when he finished, the way he responded to his reading of this poem, the way he responded was a really famous sonnet that will later be considered one of the classic sonnets of all time about reading. Much have I traveled in the realms of gold, and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. Some of us will go, this is a cat who traveled nowhere. He was poor, guys. Unlike Wordsworth, unlike Byron, unlike Shelley, Keats was born in poverty. He never had the classic education of the elite, of the wealthy. He didn't go to Eton. He never had those options of travel like Wordsworth. Wordsworth had seen all of Europe, not Keats. But Keats will say, much have I traveled in the realms of gold, and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. Round many western islands have I been, which bards, poets, in fealty to Apollo hold, the great god of wisdom and poetry. Oft of one wide expanse had I been told that deep-browed Homer ruled as his domain. Yet did I never breathe its pure serene till I heard Chapman speak out loud and bold. In other words, I've done a lot of reading, Keats says, and I've done a lot of reading about the Greeks, but I never really heard the Iliad until I heard this translation of Chapman. Then felt I like, and we have some interesting similes, then felt I like what? A watcher of the skies when a new planet swims into his ken. So you're looking through the telescope, and you're like, dude, I told you to clean the telescope. What is up with? I did clean the telescope. And then all of a sudden it hits you. You've discovered a planet nobody else has seen. What does that feel like, that exhilaration? For Keats, that's what reading a good book is like. Right? Or what about this one? Like stout Cortez, when with eagle eye he stared at the Pacific, and all his men looked at each other with a wild surmise, silent upon a peak in Darien. Now let's first of all forgive Keats for his lack of knowledge of history. It isn't Cortez, is it? It's Balboa. But remember the story of Balboa, who is thoroughly convinced he's going to find his way around the world. And he lands at that landmass that we know of as South America. And they begin that process of walking through that jungle. And the journals of this experience are remarkable. As he says, they're walking for days through the Andes and they don't see the sky because of the density of the foliage of the... They're trying to see the sky. They walk for days and it's just dark because they can't see any blue sky because the foliage is so dense. Men start dying because of any number of reasons, and they begin to say, we're done with this project. Several times Balboa has to protect his own life until finally they come out at Darien, that mountain right there looking out onto the Pacific. What would it be like to be the very first people, white people, to see that Pacific Ocean? As you come through those trees, and for the first time, you go, oh, the Pacific Ocean, which makes the Atlantic Ocean look like a pond, right? And you've been walking for months, and all of a sudden, you come out onto this Darien peak, this little hill, and you look out onto the Pacific Ocean. Keats says, that's what reading a good book for me is like. In other words, this is the great poem of reading as travel. which is an interesting idea. But now we'll turn to the poem that easily constitutes Keats' most important work, Ode on a Grecian Urn. Now, we're going to be looking at this poem with some intentionality. So you'll want to be in page 866 now of your hymnals. First of all, let's get some nomenclature out of the way. An urn is going to be a very particular kind of piece of art. The Greeks would often, and we know this, of course, from our Iliad, don't we? The Greeks would often burn their bodies as part of their funeral. The ashes would then be collected inside of an urn. The Greeks would decorate these urns, and one of the findings that are brought back to the London Natural Museum of History, where Keats will be looking at it, is an urn that sits on a turntable where you can sit in one spot and you can look at it. We're told Keats would spend hours looking at this. And he was really intrigued by the fact that thousands of years before, some artist had decorated this urn. It had gone under the ground, been lost, and then excavated and found, and then brought back so it can sit in front of him and he can look at it. And for Keats, he's going to have all kinds of interesting observations about what that means. Let's go ahead and say it out loud. Ode on a Grecian Urn is a poetic essay on the power of art, the importance of art, we might say. This poem, well, I mean, you can do your own research to see just how much this poem has been critiqued within the academic community as considerations of one of the greatest poems of all time. Certainly sits right there with Tintern Abbey and some of the other lyrical poems that we've been studying. Of course, let's also define it to be what we mean by an ode. An ode, an apostrophe. To speak directly to an inanimate object as if it has some kind of personal capacity to be able to hear and respond. Interestingly, in this poem, it will respond. Let's take a look at the poem now in the exegete. 866, Ode on a Grecian Urn. Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time, sylvan historian, who canst thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme? What leaf-fringed legend haunts about thy shape of deities or mortals or of both in Tempe or the dales of Arcady? What men or gods are these? What maidens loathe? What mad pursuit? What struggle to escape? What pipes and trembles? What wild ecstasy? Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Therefore, ye soft pipes, play on, not to the sensual ear, but more endeared, pipe to the spirit ditties of no tone. Fair youth beneath the trees, thou canst not leave thy song, nor ever can those trees be bare. Bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss, though winning near the goal. Yet do not grieve, she cannot fade, though thou hast not thy bliss. Forever wilt thou love, and she be fair. Ah, happy, happy boughs, that cannot shed your leaves, nor ever bid the spring adieu. And happy melodists, unwearied, forever piping songs, forever new. More happy love, more happy, happy love, forever warm and still to be enjoyed, forever panting and forever young. All breathing human passion far above, that leaves a heart high sorrowful and cloyed, a burning forehead and a parching tongue. Who are these coming to the sacrifice? To what green altar, O mysterious priest, leadst thou that heifer lowing at the skies, and all her silken flanks with garlands dressed? What little town by river or seashore or mountain built, with peaceful citadel, is emptied of this folk this pious morn? And, little town, thy streets forevermore will silent be, and not a soul to tell why thou art desolate can e'er return. O Attic shape, fair attitude, with breed of marble men and maidens overwrought, with forest branches and the trodden weed, thou silent form dost tease us out of thought, as doth eternity, cold, pastoral. When old age shall this generation waste? Thou shalt remain in midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man, to whom thou sayest, beauty is truth. Truth, beauty. That is all you know on earth, and all you need to know. Now, I often like to lecture this poem because as we begin it, often young philomaths, young scholars, they will not immediately identify much with this poem. In fact, they're a bit incredulous when I tell them that of all the poems we've studied, I am not kidding you, in the Romantic period, far more than anything by Wordsworth, Coleridge, Byron, or Shelley, this poem, 10 to 1, is given more energy, more action, more academic viewing. Really, really, really. All you got to do is Google search it in terms of Google Scholar to see how many papers have been written on this poem. I am not exaggerating when I say tens of thousands of pages have been written on this poem. And again, often students will look at me and say, well, there's clearly something I missed about this poem then. How does one look and even read this poem? The process of exegesis now will begin. We'll finish tomorrow if we don't have time today to complete, but I want to at least set up our conversation. Notice that on its surface level, it's a pretty simple poem. Keats is looking, I'll ask you a series of rhetorical questions. You can jot down ideas in your notes. Keats is looking at an urn. What is on the outside of the urn? Jot down specifics. I'm obviously helping you get ready for the exam. By the way, one student once said, to prep for the next exam, it makes good sense to be able to have memorized all of the Keats poetry that I've taught to you. Probably not a bad idea. Don't be shocked when you're, for example, asked specifics like the one I'm asking now. Specifically, what is on the urn physically that Keats is looking at? In each one of our opening stanzas, notice, you are going to have beautifully balanced stanzas of 10 lines, notice, right? In each one of these little stanzas, you'll identify different kinds of foci. But the most easy way to say it is what? What is it that's on the outside of the urn? Drawings. What kinds of drawings? Artwork, we might say. What kinds of artwork and drawings? Well, we're going to have something there about guys and girls. Some young guy trying to kiss the girl, right? You're going to have trees that are in the spring, just recently budded. In this fourth stanza, you're going to have something about the Dionysian Festival being celebrated. Uh-oh, what's that all about? The Dionysian Festival, the Festival of Bacchus. Yes, that's right, in the spring, they're leading some kind of heifer out to be sacrificed for the, rites of spring celebrations and the like. By the end of the poem, Keats is ready to say something to the urn, and then the urn will respond back to Keats. It's there in that final stanza that the majority of the work regarding this poem has, really been addressed. Although, Forever Young and, Rod Stewart will turn a song into this. And obviously you've probably heard, some of the lines from this poem to be used in other works of art or whatever. Notice he calls it an Attic shape, that is to say, Greek. Here paying tribute, as all romantics will, to the classic Greeks. Fair attitude, it is beautiful. With breed of marble men and maidens overwrought, we mentioned it. With forest branches and the trodden weed, we mentioned it. Thou silent form. But about this work of art, he says, it does tease us out of thought. Now, if someone is doing her hair, and she teases her hair, and she's in the 1950s especially, what does that mean? Are you familiar with that hair fashion? What does that mean to tease hair? What does it mean? That's right, that's right. We are pulling, that's literally what the word tease means, to extract or to pull out. So what is it that he says about this work of art? It teases us out of thought. That's a poetic way to say what? Looking at this work of art makes us think, doesn't it? Makes us think. In the same way, eternity makes us think. The notion of the infinitive, right? What does it mean to be eternal? What does it mean to say that number is infinite? We pause, we think about that. Cold, pastoral. Why? Because it's just a work of art sitting there. It's cold. Then he makes an interesting observation about this work of art. Keats knew he was already dying when he wrote these lines. When old age shall this generation waste, thou, the urn, shalt remain in midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man. He points out, I'm soon to die. But this work of art, it's going to remain much longer than this generation that I'm a part of. Interestingly, guess what? The urn is still there. You can go and see it today. And guess what? As long as nobody gets nuts and kills it and jacks with it, here in 4,000 or 5,000 years, guess what? As long as there's civilization, that work of art will still be there. Keats is interested by that fact. But then notice what it is he says next. The work of art will speak. Notice it begins by being silent. Now it's going to speak. What is it that the work of art will say? This urn will speak. It's in quotation marks. You want to write these words down because I'm going to give you the assignment of thinking about them. Beauty is truth. Truth, beauty. Okay? Notice that's the end of the quotation marks. Do you see it? Study closely your punctuation. Beauty is truth. Truth, beauty. That's in quotation marks. That's what the work of art says. Keats comes back to finish the poem with a dash, and Keats the poet says, that is all you know on earth, and all you need to know. Now this creates some controversial questions. The work of art will say, beauty is truth, truth, beauty. Keats will say, that line, beauty is truth, truth, beauty, that is all you will ever know in your entire life. You will never know anything other than that. But don't fret, because that's all you need to know. Whoa. Keats says, if I had to reduce everything you've ever learned in school, or everything you'll ever learn in school, if I had to reduce everything you'll ever learn in life up to this point, or everything you'll ever learn going forward, I can reduce it all to a single line. Just one. Beauty is truth. Truth, beauty. There it is. You can fold up your books and go home. You don't need to do any more homework. Keats says that's all you'll ever know and all you need to know. So I'll ask a couple of questions. You may want to jot down these questions and we'll want to maybe try and answer them in more detail. Is it in your life to this point true? Has it been the case that beautiful things are always true? Keats was aware of what Hamlet says to Ophelia about beautiful women. Did he say they always tell the truth? I don't think so. Do beautiful women always tell the truth? Do beautiful men always tell the truth? See? Keats says beauty is truth. All right, let's go the other way. In your life to this point, for you, has truth always been beautiful? So, for example, when someone spoke words to you, they qualified as being 100% true. They maybe told you what they thought of you. They told you what their view of you was, and it was truth, at least from their perspective. Was that always beautiful for you? So when somebody, for example, spoke truth to you that caused you tremendous pain, did you go, yay, they just told me something that really hurt my feelings. That's so beautiful. Is truth always beautiful? How do you explain this line? Beauty is truth. Truth, beauty.